Okay, it's now 7:05, Wednesday, April 7th. And we're going to get started with economic development meeting. But before we get started, I'd like to just take a moment of silence for one of you guys, one of the former city councilors and aide to the mayor, Ash, mother. If we can just do a moment of silence for his mother. Okay, thank you. So I want to thank everyone who's in attendance. I'd like to thank my colleagues. I see Councilor Walsh, Councilor Gomez, Councilor Whitfield, Councilor Letterman have joined us. We'll just, what I'll do is just going in the order of what I see, I'll just say your name, and you just basically can identify yourself and how you're affiliated. So first I see, of course, Ed Bakula.
Hi, City Solicitor.
Councilor Gomez.
Present.
No, I'm just saying who you are, introducing.
Already.
Councilor Walsh.
City Councilor at Large, Kateri Walsh.
Vincent Walsh.
Chairman of the Springfield Historic Commission.
And Deja Pink.
India Pink, represent as a resident.
I see Damien's iPhone.
Sorry, just had a problem unmuting. Yeah, Damien Phillips, resident, 111 Dartmouth Terrace.
I see Charles Holmes.
Yes, sir. Charlie Holmes, community activist.
Councilor Whitfield.
Tracy Whitfield, Springfield City Councilor at Large.
Councilor Letterman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Jesse Letterman, City Councilor at Large.
I see Kathy Breck.
Good evening, councilors.
And I believe Kathy is from the law department.
Yes, she's the Deputy City Solicitor.
Okay. Glad to have you, Kathy. And I see Keisha McMullen. Okay, and I see a Gilbert Dillard.
That's incorrect, Councilor Brennan. It's David Gaby.
David. Okay.
We're sharing a Zoom setup here.
Okay. Okay. So what we're basically here for is basically a group that is from the McKnight area. They've sent over some information. They had a few questions that they wanted to present. They wanted to present a few things to us as a council. And they had a few questions as far as which ways to go. So I don't want to take a lot of time, so I'll let Dave, if you want to explain, or Charles, if you guys want to explain exactly.
Can I be heard?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Does everybody have the materials I sent over?
Yes, I think you can share your screen too, Dave. Can't you?
I never did that. Let me try to see if it works. In essence, and I'm going to state it as I did in my cover email, McKnight CDC is a nonprofit based in Springfield that put in an application for community preservation funds in 2018. At the time, the Community Preservation Committee recommended that $25,000 be approved. Attorney Pakula raised an objection, which I found very offensive, but I subsequently researched. But anyway, as I understood his objection, it was that it was inappropriate as he saw it, and he can correct me if I misunderstood, but as my understanding was, he felt it was inappropriate for the city council to be granting money to a nonprofit organization or any kind of an organization to be granting money to third parties without the city council being disclosed to the city council and being voted on the record which properties were being assisted. I researched that subsequent to his comments and found out that according to the people that are working with the Community Preservation Act, he was correct. And we subsequently submitted a revised program, which I'm going to try to share the screen here. We submitted in 2019. Pardon me.
I was looking for
I'm not
something.
going to try to submit. Sorry, I'm not going to try to share the screen. I've submitted to the city council, but the essence of it is that we proposed to assist 5 properties, specific properties, 212 Bay Street, 20 Buckingham Street, 111 Dartmouth Terrace, 35 Florida Street, and 62 Westminster Street, all of which are in the McKnight National Register District, but not necessarily in the McKnight Local District. And we further proposed that rather than funds being granted specifically to as in a check being given to our organization for use for whatever purpose, that the funds would be only advanced basically to contractors working on the several properties upon approval of insurance certificates, work write-ups, and so forth by your committee. Up until today, we haven't had any feedback on that directly from either the committee or the law, or the committee or the council or the law department. And the prior chairperson, Mr. Gomez, did not hold a hearing. And then when I explored it, I found that, at least as Bob McCarroll's understanding, that when something's on the table after a certain period of time, it dies. So what we're asking tonight is that the committee help us perfect a new order, possibly with the assistance of the law department, that would that would be consistent with the law, but which would also allow those properties to be assisted that we've identified. Now, I'd like to put out a little bit in context. Year and a half or two have gone by. Our proposal was based on volunteers on the committee who none of which are interested in receiving assistance, for the neighborhood and divided properties into different classifications based on their need, and came up with those that had conditions that were impacting the neighborhood. Now, as an example, the Dartmouth Terrace house. The Dartmouth Terrace house is at the intersection of the 2 most prominent streets in the community, and is architecturally important to the whole district. The Florida Street house. The Florida Street house has a particularly one of the few remaining barns that still exists in the community, and which we'd like to see. Needs a roof very badly. We'd like to see that fixed. We don't think it's within the means of the present owner, which is Ms. McMullen, who's just inherited a house from her mother. None of these houses, because of their condition, would be eligible for the painting program, because you can't paint something that, well, it would be eligible if the fixing was done, but the painting, excuse me, the painting is, requires the house to be fixed first. So what we're suggesting is that we develop or work together to figure out what kind of an order would be appropriate and move forward, because now we've had another year and a half or 2 years of wear and tear, and we've got some significant condition issues which are being pointed up by the law department through its code enforcement division. And they're not being untruthful. They are significant condition issues. In fact, as the contractor that we recruited suggested in his estimate on the Dartmouth Terrace house, we're nearing the point where structure may collapse and cost us much more in the future. That's as much a presentation I feel comfortable making, Chairman Brown. I'd like to I'm wondering if other people have anything to add or feedback.
Okay. All right, Dave, thank you. Basically, from what I'm getting from you, Dave, and Ed, if you can maybe chime in, or one of my colleagues, they want to see if it's possible, I guess. Is it something that's possible? And if so, what are the steps needed? I'm not an expert on it. I don't know. This is kind of like what the meeting's for, to kind of figure it out, put some heads together and see, is it something, what can they do? Is it possible, Ed?
Yeah, so let me start by saying, David, thank you for that summary. I remember now. I'm going to have to go back and look for that opinion. I remember I did an opinion. I can't remember what it was, but you know, I did see there's some emails with a bunch of documents. I apologize. I literally just left the office and I have not had a chance to read all of the documentation, but I will be happy to review and try to find a path forward. I did ask Kathy Breck to participate because I know she put together a contract for our Office of Planning and Economic Development that has a program where there has been some funds granted. I don't know the details, but I'd want to work with Kathy because Deputy Breck is the contract expert. You know, the Community Preservation Act is new to Springfield. It's something that has been in a lot of other communities, but it's not something that I grew up with, so to speak. But I've done a lot of work learning about it. And let me start by just asking a few questions, and I don't want to dominate this. I think, Mr. Gaby, what would probably be great if tomorrow me and you spoke offline so I got more details. But let me just start by saying, number one, these are community preservation funds from raised by the from taxpayers.
Right.
And so the first thing we need is to make sure there's a public purpose. So there's public purposes allowed under this. And I'm assuming, since I see Mr. Walsh here, that the purpose here is historic preservation.
That's correct.
All right. So in order to have that public policy met, we would probably need some historic preservation restrictions placed on these property. Is that part of this proposal?
That's part of the proposal.
Okay, so we'd want to, it would need that. Does the proposal involve any sort of, because another public purpose potentially is affordable housing? Are there any affordable housing restrictions being proposed here?
We are working with another program with both historic and affordable housing restrictions. This is specifically aimed at architectural preservation.
Right.
So we think there is an intersection between preservation and affordability, and that's how we're working on the loan aspect of it, but we're not saying it's about
that's not going to be one of the restrictions required
right.
here. The public purpose is solely historic preservation. Okay. Then the other thing that interests me is you indicated there's some code enforcement issues. Are all of these houses have some sort of court involvement, or some of them?
Two of them that I'm aware of.
Okay.
One of the others has gotten a roof repair. It went through the code. I'm not sure the code relationship, but it went through a roof repair emergency.
So there might not have been a court case, but there was our inspectional services people involved.
Yes, I'm sure.
Okay. So, you know, one of the issues whenever you're spending public money and you've got a public purpose, you also have to look to, is there going to be what's called the anti-aid amendment? The anti-aid amendment is a constitutional provision that puts restrictions on the city in terms of providing money to third parties. I'm not going to bore you with the details there. I'm going to just ask Mr. Gavey when we talk tomorrow to go through all of that, because if I understand that the contract here would be with a community development corporation. I forget the name, McKnight or something.
I think as we spoke about that whatever number of years ago, what we've tried to do is reform the program so that the contract would be between a property owner and the city.
Okay.
With the contract with the Community Development Association or organization purely as assistant to management.
All right. So, okay, that's helpful. That sort of takes out the middleman. So basically, the private entity would play a role, but would not be like the funding source. Is that okay? All right. So and then what intrigues me is the other thing you need to look at is accountability. So for all of these contracts that we have, you know, we need to manage them and make sure that they're being spent properly. And so to the extent that there's been some court involvement, that could be very helpful in making sure that the money is spent properly. And similarly, maybe if there's just the building department involved or housing department or what have you. But that's where I want to work with Attorney Breck. I want to work with Echo Dev, and I want to talk to my code enforcement lawyers so that we can try to find a way to make this happen. I'll need a couple days to figure this out. You know, when are we next meeting on this, or what is your timeline here?
Well, one thing my main concern basically would be some of those people who are dealing with the court stuff. Some of the constituents have certain concerns. Is there any way is there anything we can do to aid in any of that? Because some of them they have court dates, I believe, on the 9th.
Yeah, but I know the lawyers in code enforcement, so I can help you there.
All right.
All right. So, I mean, obviously, if there's court deadlines, then, you know, it would probably be the lawyers working for me. I apologize. You know, at any given time, we probably have 800 cases filed involving houses. I haven't looked at those lately, but I will. That is part of what I want to. I want to engage with them. And if that's the driving force, then I can assure you that, you know, we'll work with my code lawyers and our inspectional services to see that whatever schedule is going to be handled efficiently. But like I said, so I've got a little homework to do. And it's going to be, you know, investigating some of these facts with Mr. Gaby, with some of the other people with the city, with some of my colleagues in the law department, and I can get back to you. I feel like I'll need at least a week. I apologize, but it's, you know, I'm just learning about this now. Like I said, I've got a good handle on this stuff. I've done it in the past. I've got Attorney Breck who can help me. I've got a lot of the code enforcement lawyers, and, you know, we'll talk with. I'm not sure exactly how the city program is administered, but I want to look at that because I want to compare it to see what controls we have there and whether we could make those controls applicable here. But so those are some of the touchstones. Those are some of the issues that I'd want to look at, and you know, I'll do whatever I can to try to make this happen.
Thank you, Ed. I have Councilor Letterman.
Yeah, a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling the meeting, and I do remember this issue from I think 2 years ago. You know, first, let me say that the program that was established by the Department of Economic Development, you know, they just made their first awards yesterday, so it's great to see that program advancing. And I think the solicitor will find when he looks at that there are some good controlling policies in there that will make sure those funds are properly spent. So I think that's a good thing to look at, and I'm hopeful that that will lay the foundational groundwork for an expanded program in the future that can maybe do more painting and windows as that one does, and hopefully also open that up to other historic districts and non-historic districts as well, hopefully through, if we can see the appropriate proposals come forward. With that said, I have a question about where these specific funds actually are, because this was a CPC recommendation that came to the council for the original project, and then I believe was never voted upon. I don't believe it was ever actually voted down, but as Mr. Gaby pointed out, I think it was in committee and it died there. So with that said, I think there's also a question of the role of the CPC, because those funds are actually granted by the CPC, and they were granted for that program that the city council then did not approve. So I guess the question is, I assume those funds are sitting in reserve with the CPC, but would the CPC need to approve a new project either under this current funding cycle or retroactively somehow? I think those are also questions that need answered, because as I kind of see this is sort of like a new proposal to the CDC for these 4 properties or however many that the CDC is kind of putting in on behalf of the residents. And you can do that to the CPC. I mean, anybody can submit to the CPC, and I think in the past, some private homeowners have. I don't know if they've been granted under that, because I don't know if they were ready to do that, but it seems like this is a new proposal. And so I don't know that we necessarily will have the authority to just say, yes, that's fine. So I would just want those questions answered as well. Mr. Chairman, I'm sure the solicitor can look into that.
If I may, that's a very good point. I did not mention, but I wanted to talk to finance. Under the act, the way it works is the Community Preservation Act Committee makes recommendations, and they make recommendations to the legislative body, and the legislative body makes the appropriations. Now, the treasurer is the only other person that plays a role there, because the treasurer holds the funds. So, I mean, if I'm understanding what's going on, is there's some leftover funds here that might have been part of some sort of recommendation, but now there's changes to the recommendation. So we may need to have a new recommendation from the committee before the city council can act. That if I understand this is different than whatever had been proposed before. And so we probably would need a new recommendation, but you know, those are the details. I'll figure it out. Like I said, if I can make this happen, I will. Another person that I would want to talk to, I believe Bob McCarroll, he was the chair. I don't know if he still is.
Maybe he still is, yeah.
Okay.
Through the chair, I can help you with that. This is Kathy Brock.
Yes, Kathy, go ahead, Kathy.
If you don't mind. And I did speak with Bob McCarroll today about this. And he indicated that the 2018 proposal was recommended for a small amount of money, but it went into committee, the city council committee, and did not ever get voted on. So that died in committee. And then there was another proposal in 2020. There was an application in the 2020 funding cycle to the Community Preservation Committee, but the committee did not recommend it. Therefore, it never got to city council.
Okay, that's helpful.
Sure.
So it may be, I mean, I don't know that, because what you're saying here is that there was some funds that they were recommended, but apparently never appropriated.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilor Letterman, go ahead.
I think that's correct, and my understanding is the city council can approve when the recommendation comes. I believe the state's controlling statute says we can either approve it or we can reduce it, but we can't increase it or change it.
Right.
So I think we would need the CPC involved in some way.
Yeah, so that's what those details. We'll put it all together. I'll put all that together. I'll talk to everybody. I'll write a memo so everyone will have it. Like I said, give me a week. I'll do everything I can to make this successful, and report back to you.
Okay. And I have Councilor Walsh.
Chairman Brown, I distinctly remember this project and many conversations with Dave Gaby about it. And as I remember, the city council took it up once and we held it or delayed it because there were concerns from the law department about some of the issues that our city solicitor outlined earlier in the program. But my question would be now about timeline, because it would appear to be that the old proposal is dead, and that this is a new proposal. But hasn't the timeline for reviewing new CPA projects ended for this year? Because I believe they're under review now. So would this project then be delayed another year?
Do you have Ed? Or...
Yeah, I have actually participated, not recently, but in past CDC meetings where this issue kind of came up and how to deal with it. And I can't remember whether I can't remember if they proposed some regulations to deal with it or some process, but things that were sort of, if you will, out of order. How do we get them on track? And so I want to talk to Bob about that, because that, I think we'd want to follow precedent. We want to make sure that we're not just doing things arbitrarily, that we're doing things in accordance with whatever process we followed in the past. And you're right, they put together a process where applications are submitted and reviewed and then sort of narrowed down. And there's proposals, there's provisions for revising them. So, I will have to go over all that, and my opinion will include timelines.
Okay, because I believe, and my colleagues may know, but I think there was a meeting this week to review some of the current CPA proposals. So
Kathy, do you know?
I guess that's something we need to know.
I don't know for certain. This is Kathy Brock. I believe the deadline was either sometime in March or April, as Councilor Walsh mentioned, but I don't know the specific date. But to my knowledge, there was no proposal submitted to the CPC for this round by this particular group.
That's not correct.
There was a 2020 application that was not recommended.
There's a 2021 application also.
Okay, I was not aware of that. Thank you.
All right. So David, was that you?
That was me.
All right. So why don't we talk tomorrow to go over that, and maybe that's where we start. So I can, like I said, me and you can talk.
What's a good time?
I have 10 o'clock.
11.
Tell you know what? Can you shoot me an email with a good number to reach you?
Yes.
And if 11 o'clock works, then let's work off that.
Fine. I'll shoot you an email.
This is Charlie. I just want to say a few words.
Hold on, Charles. I had Councilor Whitfield, and then I have you after, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So the deadline was April 1st for the applications. And from the McKnight CDC, I see City of Homes Living Museum. is that the same thing?
It's part of it. That's
The Living Museum?
the Living Museum proposal includes, if you look at the entire title, it says in restoration project. There's
Okay,
different-
because on the list that was sent to us, it just says City of Home Living Museum.
Happy
It
to send
doesn't
you a
say,
copy.
and restoration, it doesn't say that. And how were these specific properties selected?
As I said before, a committee of residents toured the entire neighborhood, including the National Register District section that was left out of the city's program, and came up with a number of properties that were damaging the community in general, those which needed serious restoration work and which were not being addressed.
How many residents was that, and how were they selected?
Our committee has been selected by our board of directors, which is actually people from the community. I was on the committee. Mr. Stephen Gray was on the committee, and Charlie was on the committee, Charlie Knight. We are still operating under our bylaws, which I'll share otherwise. We are working with people who have demonstrated commitment to an open and inclusive neighborhood. We're not, but anyway, we went through what was the windshield survey process, classified properties in 4 categories, and then contacted those that we thought were significantly in need. There were 2 properties one on Yale Street and one on Buckingham Street, that the owners we were either not able to reach the owner on Yale Street, and we were not able to find any level of cooperation or the openness to even fixing the house on the Naismith house on Buckingham Street. So we selected these 5 as properties that need restoration. We also selected several which are in your supporting materials as ones which have had inappropriate modernization that we think is a concern for the community. But that was our process.
Any of the 10 people on the committee, were any of their properties selected?
No.
So none of the people on the committee has a property that was selected?
That is correct.
And how much were you awarded in 2018 that was set aside? Was that the 25,000 that you were talking about?
That is. It was not an award, it was a recommendation.
Okay.
That's in addition to the, pardon me.
No, you can finish, Dave.
In addition to the other recommendation that was also tabled as a result of Attorney Pakula's concerns.
There was another recommendation, so there was 2 amounts?
There were 2. There was a $25,000 for our proposal, and I believe there was $100,000 for the trustees of preservation proposal.
And that was tabled as well, is what you're saying?
That was tabled as well. And from what I understand, Bob some time ago, they reallocated a portion of the trustees proposal to fund some part of the Indian motorcycle project, but there was still a balance of funds left from that as well.
The trustees of preservation is separate from the McKnight CDC?
Yes. The trustees of preservation were set up in some way relevant to the MGM casino, and they've been operating a trust fund, and there's a variety of people on that, including statewide people.
And my final question is for Ed. If there's code enforcement issues with that, hinder these funds going to any of these properties?
I don't know. That's why I want to look to see what's the code case, and if there's some orders here, is there some creative way to have the court involved, to help remove the blight, that would be another public purpose, I guess, but I don't know that that's necessarily, Well, it would work in conjunction with historic preservation is what I would imagine.
And that was my final question, but Ed, I'll wait till you get that. But Dave, I have one more question. Can you repeat what area this is again? You said it's not directly a historic district.
No,
say that again.
The McKnight National Register Historic District goes all the way from Monmouth Street, or like the dry bridge, all the way down to Bowden Street and all the way to State Street. So Marion Street, Catherine Street, Princess Street are included in the National Register District, but they're not included in the local district. So when money was granted for the local district, for instance, the Planning and Economic Development Program that Mr. Letterman was talking about, the houses on Lower Florida Street or Princeton Street would not be eligible for that, whereas we looked at the entire district, including the areas that are sometimes left out.
Do you have a map of that area you could share?
I can send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. I have Charles Holmes.
Yes, I just wanted to say a few words. Thank you, Councilor Chairman Brown, for getting us all together, because we got some real people that really need help. That's not, because technically in a natural district, but they are. And it's been years, and to keep these people updated about the progress, it was very frustrating to these people who are trying to get help. Some of these people are now in code enforcement due to the fact that the problem has deteriorated so much because of lack of assistance and the lack of the communications with the council to get things done over the last 2 years. So, the years has passed. Now it's even more damage and more situations. So I'm glad that everyone's finally coming together, because everyone has the same common purpose, is to help each resident of the city of Springfield. But we all have to work together more. And I'm glad that you're making this happen, to fuse all this confusion together. And so we can have a better city for everyone, not just people on certain streets, but everyone that's entitled to that. And we kept it fair. And we went door to door and asked people what they really need and what they want. And the people want to save their homes and to live in their homes and to be comfortable. And thank you for everybody for just giving us the opportunity to get this back on the table, because it was off the table for so long that people are thinking that everything is fiction. So we just don't tell people that's nonfiction. We have an actual meeting where people have actually talked. We have the lawyer for the city at Pakula. He said he gave us a real promise to have, a timeline where we could at least talk about it, because we were shunned and pushed to the side. And it's real frustrating when you go out here in the community and people ask you for real help, and we tell them about available programs that are offered through various chapters of things, and then we hear no more, and then they're thinking that everything is fraudulent, and that makes these voters get more and more mad at the council and the city of Springfield. Like, thinking there's only one side and for one people. It's just for all the people of Springfield. We're one group. That's all I have to say. Thank you all for helping out.
Thank you, Charles. I want to recognize, Councilor Dalvias and Councilor Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had experience in working with a CDC of Colleen Loveless, and this CDC specifically targets veterans within the cities. A couple of years ago, we did receive $750,000 for 2 years to restore in homes for veterans within the city, which we have done quite a few, and the other cities and towns around us. As you say you are a nonprofit 501c3?
That's correct.
Okay. So the fundings that we're talking about here is city fundings.
Community Preservation Act funding.
I see. Is there any opportunities that we can go to state and national in trying to access any of this funding as a 501c3?
There is, and we're working on that, Councilor Gomez. In fact, we're working very hard on it. One of the elements that goes into it, and we've received some funds like from the Department of Energy to help with solar power and so forth. But one of the things that people are looking for is to see that kind of team come together that we were just hearing about. And I think if we can work with Councilor Pikula and the city councilors and figure out how to move forward so that we can do a little bit with city funds, then people in the foundations and the federal government can see that we're working together and they can be supportive. There's one program, for instance, called Save America's Treasures that we're hoping to apply for when it comes back up in January. And we may be able to get as much as $500,000 through that fund for historic preservation. There's other programs that we're looking at, and I think if we can create the kind of a team that we're talking about tonight, we can move forward with that.
I agree. I think that that we should go out there and try to find all the fundings that we can, because we'll probably will dry our well within the city in restoration. So we need other help. But again, I believe that we need to wait for Mr. Pikula to do his research and get back to us and see what he brings back, and then we can start working closely with you. It's a great idea. I support it and wish to be part of it and make our city more beautiful than what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. Councilor Letterman.
Sure, Chairman Brown. I just wanted to make a point for a moment about the existing program that was just kicked off with their awards this year, because I think one thing that we should all be looking toward is the fact that, I apologize, Mr. Gaby, I think I heard my dog bark outside, and I think I got yours going because I'm sitting right across the street here from Mr. Gaby. But with that said, I think one of the things we should look to is the expansion of that program, because the reason that program was put in place the way that it was because this is really the first time in at least a very long time in my memory that the city will be putting any funds into the restoration and support of private residences. And they're able to do that under the CPC because of the purpose of that fund, and because, as the solicitor and the chair of the Historic Commission have pointed out, the historic preservation component of that. But we want to make sure that anytime the tax dollars are being put into use in this way, that we're doing it the right way. And I think that the city is using that local historic district as a pilot piece because there's already specific controls in place within the local historic district. But the pledge from economic development, when they brought that to us, was that it could expand in the future, both to other historic districts and then also to other historic properties, whether they're in the local district or not. So I think that needs to be chief among us, because my biggest, in addition to historic preservation, my biggest priority is for any types of taxpayer funds, whether it's CPA or otherwise, that end up going out, that we can make sure that those are properly applied and done within all the proper legal ways that the solicitor will outline for us. So I think that's the reason that the program might not have been as big as we would have liked it to have been last year when it was first granted. But I do think that this year it will be successful, and I think that can allow it to head towards the expansion that all of us would ultimately like to see. I just think we need to make sure that individuals know it's a fair process. And I think that's why it's so vital for it, in my opinion, to go through economic development with the oversight of the city council and with that public process to play out. For example, the project that was just granted, that was a lottery. Anybody could apply, and then they pulled for what they had. So I think that's essential, because we know there are so many homes that do need assistance at this time. So that's all I got, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, Keynes. Thank you, Councilman Letterman. Did you have anything, Councilman Gomez? Your hand was still raised, or?
No.
Oh,
Now,
and I see Councilman Whitfield. Did you have something?
Yes, I just wanted to add one comment, and I wanted to piggyback off of what Councilor Letterman said. I'm going to have to agree with, I think the appropriate channels would be to go through the Economic Development Department and City of Springfield, because as I did door knocking in the McKnight neighborhood, and I talked to a lot of residents that have historic properties, especially the elderly, they were looking, you know, the receivership program, we're looking to, you know, take some of their homes, and they didn't know what to do and they didn't have any funding. And so I think a fair process would be the lottery process, or a process that's run by the city with oversight from the city and the council. And so I'm going to say that I have to agree with what Councilor Letterman said. Me and Councilor Letterman also spoke about this at length, and was trying to come up with a great solution for all residents in all historic districts to have a fair opportunity and not specifically selected property. So I'm going to have to say that I agree with his statement on that.
Thank you, Councilman Whitfield.
Can I respond a little bit?
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
So I grew up partly as a teenager working with people in the planning department. I've got a planning degree and as well as a historic preservation degree. And I think that the thing that's being missed by people who are trying to be loyal to their municipality, not to knock Phil or anybody involved in the government or anyone else that's involved in City Hall, but there are a lot of other resources in the community besides people that work for the city. And if we combine those resources, as Mr. Gomez was suggesting, to make a team effort where we can all end up with by bringing in more resources and serving the needs that are most pressing, which is the way we have devised our program, I think we can end up with a much greater result than we can if we try to shut people out by saying only things that go through planning and economic development are valid. And I think that there's, if you look at communities around the state, community development corporations who are not part of city government have made great contributions all over the state and all over the country. And that we should recognize that there are some resources in the community that can contribute, as well as at the same time that we do the things that Councilor Letterman was talking about making sure that the kinds of things that are done with city funds or taxpayer funds are appropriate, and there's a control system in place at all times. So it's not just having a control system, it's also bringing in all those extra resources from the community that we're trying to work for. And that's all I'd like to say. But I look forward to working with Attorney Pakula. I'm very pleased with the way this process is going. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dave. Is there anyone else who has any comments or questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I hope you can hear me okay, and I'm not too muffled because of the massive situation. One of the huge problems, which is in Springfield, you have city code enforcement, and then you have historic preservationists. And it seems like the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing, which is very, very frustrating to a homeowner who is trying to fix their property and trying to go through the right process and has put several years of sweat equity, their own money into the property to take a derelict property and breathe life back into it. And then you get stuck with like a front porch like mine. And I have city code people telling me, no, your rails have got to be this high. And then you have historic saying, oh no, that's not historically correct, so we cannot do that. So somebody really needs to get with the two departments, put them on the same page and say, listen, historic is different than city code. There's a huge difference. Historic features are different than current code features. And we need to respect that the historic guidelines are preserved and that we're not putting hideous rails up because city code says this is what we need. It's very confusing to a typical homeowner like myself it's very frustrating to a homeowner like myself to get. I took this house. I had to fix every plaster wall in this house because they were all broken from water damage and neglect, and from the ceiling leaking for 8 years after the previous homeowner decided, well, she finally died, and that's why the family decided to sell it, or else it would still be there falling to the ground. So I took my own money, my own sweat equity. Some of my friends helped me. We had to fix ceilings, walls, redo all the natural woodwork inside the house to keep it preserved naturally. People who have been in my house have been amazed by what's happened in it. People cannot believe the difference from the day that I bought it to what it looks like now inside the house. I'm having a huge problem with the front porch. I cannot figure out how to make bent wood, to make a corner, to make a round side to this. I've hired contractors that were licensed and insured, and they took deposits. They did a little work. They disappeared with the money. They disappeared with my supplies. I've bought supplies before, according to city code. Had my garage full of things for the porch, full of wood for the porch. They said I could not use them. The Historic Preservation said they were not acceptable and I could not use them in reconstructing the porch. So it's like you have all these departments within the city. None of them are interlinked through a central computer base. Nobody knows what each other are doing. I've got Maurice from code enforcement sending me fines, bringing me to court. And he says, and I'm going to quote him, I need to keep my job, so I do what my boss tells me to do. And that puts a very sour taste in homeowners' mouths, and people who are really trying to do something good within the city with their property. And it puts a really, really bad taste in our mouth. And that needs to be understood by the councilors. But I really appreciate you getting together, reviewing the situation, and trying to come up with a solution. I appreciate the time you're putting into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Ed, just in response, because I have heard over there in the McKnight area concern as far as the different codes not being the same. I know even Councilor Letterman might have heard that. Like, so is there it's sometimes like there's one group that'll fine you for one thing and then the other group will fine you for the other. Maybe Councilor Letterman, you know what I'm speaking of probably. Ed, or Councilor Letterman, can you?
Yeah, I understand what Ms. Phillips is saying, and Chairman Brown. I mean, and it's not just in McKnight, Councilor Walsh, and Forest Park. You know, there's the same issue. I think sometimes there's been an issue where historic code conflicts with city building code, and there doesn't always seem to be that recognition in the inspection process. So, you know, I think I know there's been some proposals in the past from the Historic Commission about how to rectify that. I think we should take those up. And I think it just really is a matter of the Historic Commission getting in a room with the code inspectors and doing a review, and then just some additional training. Because, you know, I think, again, I don't put, as was mentioned, you know, folks are just trying to do their job and follow those rules. But if there can be some additional training to help ease that burden. I know the railing height is always a big one. The railings are supposed to be certain height in most districts, but in the historic districts, they are supposed to be lower. That's the biggest one.
Thank you, Councilor Letterman. Ed, do you have anything? Can you add it?
No, I'll be happy to look into that, but it's really kind of a case-by-case thing that, okay. You know, we're not going to solve the problems of the world tonight on that. But,
Solicitor, we can't solve the problems of the world in one committee meeting?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to go get some supper.
Right, but could at least they be streamlined between the departments so that the computers are interlinked? So one department knows that we're actually going forward with a process instead of fining us all the time and bringing us to court.
Maybe Councilor Brown will have a meeting on that next time.
Love it.
Well, that was a good deflection. Good deflection.
Good night.
So, Ed, so who do we have? We still have, so basically, does anyone else have any questions? Or
this is Vinnie Walsh, Chair of the Springfield Historic Commission. I'm open to questions myself. You know, that conflict between railing heights is is a fairly basic one. Anything in a historic district is exempt from the building code, and it can be put at the historic height that it's supposed to be at. That's a fairly simple one. It's the one that gets the most problems. But any questions from me?
Anyone from?
Yeah. Wait. I got to go back to this. When we addressed this with my particular sport, they said, yeah, you could put those railings back at the same height. However, you need to add another piece of material over the top of those to make the city code. And that's exactly what he said to me. And I said, that's not acceptable from code. He goes, I don't care what's acceptable to code. That's what you need to do. And this gets very frustrating going back and forth. I feel like the ball being played in the tennis game, going back and forth over the net.
All right, thank you, Mr. David, you had something?
I have something to add. And I think, having been in on this conversation with the Historical Commission on multiple occasions, I think that Attorney Pikula just had a good idea, or someone just had a good idea that, and I'd be happy to talk with him about this and bring it back to the committee, that it might be good if the city council had some input to this, because we have a lot of turnover with inspectors. And it's not the city code, it's the state code that's in question. The state code specifically has provisions for historic districts, but everyone doesn't always know about them. And you get situations like the one that Mr. Phillips has experienced. And believe me, he's not the only one that's getting that. He might be one of the louder ones that's getting that. But we have a lot of people in the National Register District being told your house is not historic by city personnel. We have all kinds of things that are going on because of confusion. And I'd love to be able to work with people to help figure out a training process so that when someone goes to the city in good faith and asks what they should do, they get the right answer.
Thank you, Dave. Mr. Walsh, is there a way maybe you can collaborate with them to get something going to help them out or anything?
To collaborate with Mr. Phillips or Mr. Gaby's?
Mr. Gaby's group, or even the residents themselves. It doesn't have to be anything into any.
As a historic commission chair, the only thing the commission can do under its own purview relative to this is issue like letters of support. In order to issue a letter of support, we have to determine that a property is deemed to have historic value. Doesn't have to be in a historic district, either the National Register or the local or whatever. But we very often look and say, okay, that property has historic either features or details or significance. And then we issue a letter, since we have no control over money or anything like that. But all we control is the exterior visible from a public way. So it's actually more limited. Our control is much more limited than a lot of the people think. Another one of the more confusing things. But if our meeting deems something to be historical, then we just issue a letter of support, which we did for David Gaby's organization, relative to them trying to make some improvements in McKnight. And we're not judging whether the system they're trying to use is correct, but we are putting our stamp on it. It's historically appropriate in that we approve that something be done.
Thank you, Vincent. And now it's, if anyone else have any comments or questions, it's now, once again, anyone? Okay, so it's now 8:04. We've been on for an hour. What we'll look to do is I'll get in touch with the different departments, and we'll figure out, Dave and you guys, when we can get another meeting and in the future and figure out what we can do in the future.
I'll be in touch with Mr. Pikula appropriately tomorrow at his convenience.
Okay, so can I have a motion with that? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So be it.
So moved.
All right, that being said, I now end the meeting. Everyone have a good
Good
day.
night.
Good evening.
Night.
Thank
Good
you,
meeting.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.